Okay, Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Sadi Ches, Yevamos 98. We're going to start on the bottom of Yevamos Sadi Sayin Amabez 97b at the bottom. And so the Gemara Gemara is discussing a dispute between Rav Acha Bar Yaakov and Rav Sheshes about a circumstance where there were two brothers who converted, and they were maternal brothers, whether or not they are allowed to marry each other's wives after the other brother dies. So Rav Sheshes said it was prohibited, and Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said that it was permitted. So the Gemara brings now at the bottom. The Gemara is bringing several proofs, and the Gemara is going to spend some time today discussing this question. So the Gemara brings another proof from a brisa that converts that were maternal brothers are not allowed to marry each other brother's wife, and the Gemara is so therefore this is a proof for Rav Sheshes. So the Gemara says Tashma Shnei Achem. We have a brisa if there are two brothers to umim that they were twins. So we say Shnei Achem to umim gerim. There were two twins who converted. Or freed, they don't do chalitza or yibum, and the reason why they don't do chalitza or yibum, Rashi says, titzad yibum mina'afu, is because the perspective of yibum comes from the father, and because they converted, we don't consider them to have, legally speaking, a father. Because as we're going to say, the Zera Mitzri, the seed of the Egyptian, is not going to be considered like a father. So the Gemara says, so if we have these two twins who converted, or if they were freed, then they don't do chalitza or yibum. And if they marry their brother's wife, they're not going to be liable for the prohibition of marrying your brother's wife. Let's say they were conceived before they were Jewish, and then they were born when they were Jewish. Then also then we don't do chalitz or yibum, but then then they would be liable for, Rashi says, kares, for marrying their brother's wife, because the prohibition of the concept of yibum is from the paternal side, and we don't consider them to have paternal side, but the concept of marrying your brother's wife is from the maternal side. And so since she was like a Jewish woman when she gave birth to them, therefore they are brothers. And so therefore in those circumstances, they're going to be liable for marrying your brother's wife. But if they were conceived and born while they were Jewish, then they're like complete Jews. Anyway, Kotani Mias, but this price says, that if they were conceived while they were not Jewish, but born while they were Jewish, they're not liable. That if they were conceived, the first case of the Brisa says that if they converted after they were born, you're not liable for marrying your brother's wife. You're not liable them for marrying your brother's wife. However, we say but we say on the top of Tzadik Chesam and Alf, they're not liable, but it's obviously prohibited because it says you're not liable. So the Gemara says, no, who didn't feel Isur Namaleka? They're also not, it's not prohibited. But so if that's the case, why does it say you're not liable? Because the Seifa, the next clause is going to say that they are liable for marrying your brother's wife if they are maternal brothers but not paternal brothers. So therefore the first clause also uses this phrase of they're not liable. Rava taught, so now going back to this idea that if the seed is from the idolater, it's not going to be considered a paternity. Rava says, that which the rabbis taught, that there's no paternity for an Egyptian, lo tema. And here might have been, by the way, the censors to be more politically correct, because obviously there are some parts of the Talmud which could be very offensive to people who are not of Jewish faith. So some versions have here, and including Rashi, it says the version is goy and not mitzri, which is certainly less politically correct. Because, like, if you're living in Northern Europe and you start talking about this way, so if you say it's only about Egyptian, then the people in Northern Europe wouldn't be offended. But anyway, so the Rabbi says that which the rabbis taught, there's no paternity for an Egyptian. Don't say, well, it's because they're so immersed in sexual sins that we don't know who the father is. But if we could do a paternity test, and then we'd have to say this is the father. No, it's not what we're saying here. Even if we know for sure that this person is the father, meaning even if we know for sure that, let's say they were locked in a prison cell, it's only the two of them, nevertheless, we would say there's no paternity here that's attributed to the idolater. And the proof for this is, let's say you have two brothers, the tipa achasaya, they come from one drop, and nevertheless, we say that one drop split into two, so it's obviously the same father, identical twins. So katani seifa will hold some womiabin. We say under that case, since there's no paternity for the father, we don't do chalitz or yibum. So shmamina afkuri rahman azari. So the concept is the Torah makes the seed ownerless, the seed of a idolater. The seed of donkeys is their flesh. Who's the and the zirmat susim ziramtam. The seed of the horse is their seed. So we see basically is that legally speaking, we don't consider them a father. It's not that we can't say that they are the father. It's just Jewish law does not attribute paternity to the idolater. Tashma Adamar Rabbi Yossi, and now we're going back to this question of Rav Acha bar Yaakov versus Rav Sheshes, whether or not if the two brothers converted, whether or not we say that they're allowed to marry each other's wife. So Tashma the Amar Rabbi Yossi Ma'isa ben Niftiim Hager is an incident with Niftiim, the convert, Shenasa Eishes Acham Me'imo, who married his maternal brother's wife. And then they came before the sages. The sages said, it's not prohibited. So if that's the case, if they say that there's no ishus lager, meaning to say, look at what Rashi says. There is no Rashi here, but anyway, the concept of ein ishus lager is that he did it properly. We don't consider his brother's wife to be actually his wife because that they converted, so they didn't remain married. So therefore, be permitted to marry his brother's wife. Gemara says, well, if you want to say a circumstance, let's say a convert that betrothed his wife, would we indeed say that it's not a valid kedushin? So therefore, obviously, if a convert betroths somebody, it's valid. So rather, what does the brisa mean? It means that this convert there's no prohibition to marry his brother's wife if he dies, even though they were married, but they were not really brothers because they both converted, and so therefore that's what we're saying. Ein iser eishes achagar. So what's the circumstance here? Malav dinas ba'ach kashuger. So are we talking about a case even when the brother married his wife after he converted, and we're saying there's no convert, that they're not considered brothers anymore, and so therefore we see that this is proof for Rav Acha bar Yaakov against Rav Sheshes. The Lord says, no, that's not what we're talking about. The nasba kishu ovekochavim. No, what happened was that they married when they were idolaters. And so therefore, now since they married when they're idolaters, they weren't really married, and so therefore you're allowed to marry your brother's wife after you both convert. Gemara says, well, if they married while they're idolaters, Mila Memra, well, what's even talking to this? It's obviously the case. That since they only did the action while they were idolaters, and then they converted, they're not married. So the Gemara says, you might have thought, you might have said, even if they did this marriage while they were idolaters, we should make a decree and prohibit it if they got married after they were Jewish, because you might come to do it after they become Jewish. And so therefore, we're saying we don't make such a prohibition. Kamash Lord. Tashma, another attempt to prove. The Amar ben Yasyan So again, attempted proof against Rav Sheshes. Because Ben Yasyan taught, when I traveled, and when am I traveling overseas? Matzasi Gerachad, I found a convert. Shenasa Eishes Achav Me'imo. I found that he married his maternal brother's wife. Amarti Obani Mir Shacha. I said to him, who allowed you to do it? Amrlei, he said to me, Arei Isha, that there was this woman who converted with her 7 children, and Rabbi Akiva allowed her to marry his wife's brother. And that's where I learned it from. So that's what I said. There was this woman, and Al Safsal Zeh Yashav Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva sat, and he said Shnei Dvarim. He said 2 things. What did he say? He said, Ger no say Eishes Acham. A Kamer can marry Ger no say Eishes Acham Imo. A Kamer can marry his maternal brother's wife. And the second thing he said, Vayidvar Hashem al Yonah Shenis, that the word of Jonah came, God's word came to Jonah a second time. Shenis Dibrimo, which means God spoke to him a second time. The second time the Shlina spoke with him, Shlishas lo Dibrimo Shlina. The third time the Shlina did not speak with him. Anyway, by the way, what's the connection between the two seemingly random statements of Rabbi Akiva? So I heard from Rabbi Rosner in the name of the Aruch HaNer that it means that just like because they did tshuva, they overturned the bad decree to new decree and they became like new people. When you're converted, you become like a new person. So that's the connection Aruch HaNer said. But anyway, we see from this source, from this Ben Yasyan, we see from here, Katani Mias, Ger no say Eishes Achav Me'imo. We see from here that a convert is allowed to marry his maternal brother's wife. And what's the scenario we're talking about? Aren't we talking about that he married him, that the brother had married after he converted, and still we allow the maternal brother to marry his wife after he dies? Gemara says, no, that's not what we're talking about. No, they got married when they were idolaters, and then they didn't consummate the marriage after they converted. Well, the Gemara says, well, what's the chiddush there? Why would we even think that's a problem? Gemara says, excuse me, you might have thought that's a problem. You might have thought, make a decree when he's idolater, so also for when he's Jewish. Meaning to say that if we're going to allow it if they get married while they're idolaters, then they might come to do it also when they're Jewish. Mashma, we don't say that. So as says the Gemara, but the Gemara basically we're still discussing Rav Acha Bar Yaakov versus Rav Sheshes. Gemara first has a question on this incident. We had this just a few days ago on 77A around, feels like it was yesterday, but it was 20 days ago. So the Gemara says, V'amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Kol Talmud Chacham, Shemor Halacha, Uva. So the Rav says, any Torah scholar who teaches halacha, and he comes along with a chiddush, Im Kodem Ma'isa Amris, if he said this action prior, if he said his ruling prior to the action, Shomen Lo, then we believe him. V'im Lav ain't Shomen Lo, meaning to say, if he used to teach everything to the students before the incident happened, then we believe him with this chiddush. But if he says it after the action, where we say that maybe he's doing it as a result of the action and we don't listen to him, so how can we believe what Ben Yassin was saying here? So the Gemara says, meaning to say, how can we believe the convert when the convert was saying that Rabbi Akiva, that he's doing it, and he cites his teaching from Rabbi Akiva that we didn't hear before? So the Gemara says, Mora Uvahaya. So one answer is he was always teaching it. A second answer, second incident, he gave a proof text. Rabbi Akiva allowed this woman and her 7 children, so you could just go look it up. Go look up that case. Go look for that woman. Maybe this case is different. Maybe this case is different because he lumped together 2 teachings. And so therefore, since he was, he said something with it, and since he's believed on one, he's going to be believed on the other. That's what Rashi says. Because we know that one of the words is true, so therefore the other one's presumably also true as well, since he gave us this finish. So Amar Mar, let's analyze the second Chiddush. It says, "Vayi Dvar Hashem El Yonah Shenis Lemor," that God spoke to Jonah a second time. Shenis Dibrimo, Shlinas Shlishas Lo Dibrimo. God spoke to him a second time, but not a third time. Is that really the case? So we see that the pasuk says about Yeravam ben Yoash that Jonah the prophet said that he was going to be successful in reclaiming the boundaries of Israel, and that was the third time. So we see from here that God spoke to Jonah more than twice. So a couple of answers. No, God spoke to, says twice. I'll only speak to Jonah about Nineveh. That's all I'll do. Alternatively, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, so he says, no, this verse from Malachim Bet means that God spoke to him in the manner in which he spoke to Jonah. Just like Nineveh had a revolution and Nineveh went from bad to good, so too So too in the days of Yeravam, the Jewish people had a revolution from bad to good. So the Gemara says, Talshma, Ger Shahaya. Again, we're trying to prove Rav Sheshes versus Rav Acha bar Yaakov. We're going to try and disprove Rav Sheshes. Ger Shahaya Leidaso Betusha. Let's say there was a convert who was born, well, he was Jewish, well, Rasul Shalom Betusha, when he was conceived, well, he's not Jewish. We consider him to have maternal relatives, but not paternal relatives, because his mother was when he was Jewish, but his father was before he was Jewish. Kate said, how so? Let's say he marries his maternal sister. Yotzi, he has to get rid of her because he has maternal relatives. Mina'av, let's say he marries his paternal sister, Yekayim, he's allowed to stay with her. Because Rashi says, everybody knows there's no idolater, there's no paternity for idolatry. Yotzi, let's say he marries his father's maternal sister. He has to divorce her because we're concerned, because maybe he's going to come to marry his mother's father's maternal sister, or maybe he's going to come to marry his mother's maternal sister. And now the next case on top of 98b, Mina'av, let's say he marries his father's paternal sister, Yekayim. He's allowed to remain with her because it's all from the paternity. Achosa Mina'av, let's say he marries his mother's maternal sister, Yotzi. Then he has to divorce her. Mina'av, let's say he marries his mother's paternal sister, Rameir says Yotzi, Rameir says he has to divorce her. Chachamim say he can remain with her. Rameir Omar Kol Erva. Shehi Mishum She'er, because when Meir said any relative, any prohibition which is because of a relative of the mother, Yotzi, Mishum Avikayim. If it's from the mother, you have to divorce, and from the father, you can remain. Umutter be'eshes achav me'imo. And the Brisa says he's allowed to marry his maternal brother's wife, be'eshes achi aviv, and he's also allowed to marry his father's brother's wife. Ushar kol arayos mutaroslo, and all other prohibitions are permitted to him, which includes what? Why was that last line stated? Asuya eshes ha'av, to include the case of your father's wife. He's not really your father. Nasa Isho Bita, let's say he marries a woman and her daughter on the same day. Or let's say he marries a woman and her daughter, and then he converts. Kones Achas Umotzi Achas. And then he's allowed to marry one, and the other one he has to divorce. But so, but ideally he should not marry, and either one. And we're going to say what that phrase means. And Mesa Ishto, and if his wife dies, Mutter b'chamoso. He's allowed to marry his mother-in-law, V'ika Detani, and some say Asar B'chamoso. Some say he's allowed to marry his mother-in-law. Anyway, but some say he's not allowed to marry his wife's mother after she dies, if he converted with her. But anyway, we see from here, Katani Mias Mutter Be'eshes Achav. It says explicitly in the Brisa, you're allowed to marry your brother's, it says you're allowed to marry your maternal brother's wife. Aren't we talking about a circumstance where the brother marries her after he converted, and therefore this is a proof against Rav Sheshes? And Rav says no. Same answer. He married her when he was an idolater. Well, the Gemara says, well, if they get married, then they're idolatry. Obviously, it's not a marriage. So what's it even saying? No, you might have said, you might have said, let's make a decree that we're not going to allow the marriage, even if they get married when they're idolaters. We might come to allow it when they're converts, even after they converted, if they married after they converted. Kamashma, we don't say that. So the Gemara seems to say from here that there's no proof against Rav Sheshes. But in the meantime, let's analyze this brisa. If you marry a woman and her daughter, you're allowed to remain married with one, and you have to divorce the other one if they had converted. So the Gemara says, but ideally, initially speaking, you should not do that marriage. But now we have a problem. Since we said afuke mapik, we said really you shouldn't even do this marriage in the first place. The Brisa says at first you're not allowed to stay with both of them. You have to divorce one. Of course, you know that you shouldn't do it. So the Gemara says, that phrase is not going back to the phrase of the mother and the daughter, but it's going back to an earlier phrase in our Mishnah. It's referring back to an earlier phrase in our Mishnah, and this is what it is saying. So it's saying Hasam Kai. It said it's about an earlier case. And this is what it's saying. This case of a Bryce, all those cases, the Amar Rabbana and Yikayim, that the rabbi said you're allowed to keep that marriage, like the cases of the paternal sister, all those cases, really, initially speaking, you shouldn't do such a marriage. Then the next case of the Brisa says, Mesa Ishto Mutter B'chamoso. If your wife dies, if your wife and her mother converted, the wife and the daughter, you're allowed to marry her mother. Mutter B'chamoso. B'ikadetani also B'chamoso. And the other source says you're not allowed to marry her mother. Chadek Rabbi Shmuel, Chadek Rabbi Akiva. One source is like Rabbi Shmuel, and one source is like Rabbi Akiva. So how do we understand this? Man the Asuk Rabbi Shmuel. The one who says it's prohibited, this is like a dispute we had just a couple of days ago, 4 days ago. Sadi Dawad Amabeis. The one who says it's prohibited is holds like Rabbi Shmuel. The Amar Chamoso Achamisa Be'isura Kaima. He says that the mother-in-law, after their death, is Be'isura Kaima. That the mother-in-law remains the same level of prohibition even after her death. And by the convert, the rabbis made such a decree that you can't marry the mother-in-law because it's the same level of prohibition. Whereas Man Dashari, Rabbi Akiva, the one who allows you to marry your wife's mother, must be like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Chamos Hamisa. He says your wife's mother after death, is the prohibition is lesser, that it's burning while the wife and the mother are both alive, but after death it's a lesser prohibition. Begabe ger, she says the Gabe Yisrael ain't a b'sreif, she doesn't get burning. Hold on 1 second. So there's a dispute whether it's kares or it's just a regular prohibition. So anyway, but Gabiger, since this prohibition by Yisrael is less, well, go to Beit Rabbanan. The rabbis did not make such a decree, and therefore you would be allowed, according to Rabbi Akiva, to marry the wife's mother after your wife died, if the wife and her mother both converted. Now we're up to the next Mishnah. Chamesh Nashem. This is implausible scenario, but the Gemara discusses all possibilities. Let's say you have 5 women. Chamesh nashim. Let's say you have 5 women. And of these 5 women, Shinis Arvu, they became mixed up with each other, and they all had 2 kids. One of their kids they know for sure is their son, and the other one they don't know. It's mixed up with the other 5 women. Shinis Arvu was saying all their offspring became mixed up, and Higdilu. Now these 5 mixed up boys, we don't know who the father is or who the mother is. Higdilu. Now this mixture, they all grew up. And they all married women, Umeso, and now all the boys died. So you have 5 boys, but who are alive, but who we know their mothers are, but they all might be brothers with all these 5 kids. So Arba Choltzin Achas, the first 4 do Chalitza to 1 woman. And then the 5th comes along and does Yibum, because if the first one would do Yibum, then maybe he's not the brother, and then he's marrying a woman who's supposed to be doing Yibum first. And so therefore the first 4 do Chalitza, there's no prohibition to do Chalitza even if she's not your wife, and then the 5th one does Yibum. And then what do we do? Then we go to the next one, and the person who just did Yibum, he and the next 3 brothers do Chalitza to woman number 2, and then the 5th one does Yibum. So Nimtzu Arba Chalitzos B'Yibum Ukol Achas V'Achas. So we see that each one does 4 Chalitzos. Each woman gets 4 Chalitzos, and then the 5th one comes along and does Yibum on her. And specifically in a case, we say that the first 4 do Chalitza and then Yibum of a Yevume B'Reishalo, but we don't allow Yibum to be done first. Why? Because she might be, that might not be her, you might not be her husband's brother, and then you're going to be with a woman who is required to have Yibum first. Gemara says, why do we say that after the first one does Yibum, he and the next 3 brothers do Chalitza? Why does it have to tell us that? Why do we care? Maybe he'll do Yibum again. No, that's what we don't want. Don't say, and one brother should do Yibum to all of them. Let's say this one brother is the great Hasidic Rebbe. And so therefore he says, I need to do the mitzvah. No, we don't say that. Each one of them does Yibum. Each one of them does Yibum. Because maybe that he's the one to do Yibum. So rather than saying one should do Yibum to all of them, and that way he for sure has done a Yibum, done the mitzvah, at least one person has done the mitzvah, we say each one of them should try their chance at doing Yibum, so that each of them has a possibility of doing the mitzvah. Better to have 5 people have the possibility of the mitzvah than one person for sure doing the mitzvah the right way. So now we say Mitzvahs Achim. Let's say some of them were brothers, but some of them were not brothers. And the one who are for sure brothers, the one who are brothers do Chalitza, and the one who are not brothers do Yibum. Gemara says, well, what does that phrase even mean? My Kamar, what does this statement even mean? So Amrav Safar Achim Kamar. This is what it means. Some of these brothers who have survived, who we know for sure they're brothers, they were just paternal brothers, and some of them were only maternal brothers, or they were paternal brothers and maternal brothers. So then we're going to say that since some of them they were just maternal brothers and not paternal brothers, so then we say under those circumstances, Acham and Aim will choltzin. Acham and Aim choltzin, Acham and Av miyamin. But the ones who are just maternal brothers, we say that they're only allowed to do the chalitza because we don't know which one for sure that they are brothers with. And the ones who are paternal brothers, they're the ones who do yibum. And so too, miktsas and kohanim, miktsas and she'ein kohanim. Some of them are for sure kohanim, and some of them are for sure not. Some of the certain brothers are kohanim, and some of them are not. Kohanim Choltz, and then the Kohanim do Chalitza, and She'inim Kohanim Miyamin, and the other ones who are not Kohanim are do Yibam, because if they're certainly Kohanim, they can't do Yibam if the other ones do Chalitza first. Miktasim Kohanim, Miktasim Acham Menaim, if some of them are Kohanim and some of them are maternal brothers, Elu ve'elu Choltzim Lo Miyamin. Then all of these brothers just do Chalitza and not Yibam, because the Kohanim are not able to do Yibam to a Chalitza, and the maternal brothers are not able to do Yibam because maybe they're going to be with their maternal brother's wife, which is prohibited for them to do Yibam, and so therefore we're just going to say Chalitza for that woman. Okay, we'll stop here, and God willing, we're going to review this. We'll stop here, but God willing, we'll review this.